So we have Regional Chief from Manitoba, Willie Moore, who will speak first. Acting Grand Chief Betsy Kennedy from the AMC. Sorry. Grand Chief Garrison Setti, KTC Grand Chief Walter, I can't see, I didn't bring my glasses, sorry. Wessesakut, sorry. And Pima Chikame Chief David Munias. And then we have Dr. Cindy Blackstock following up. So we'll do all those in order, and then we'll take questions from the media. Regional Chief.
Thank you, Jamie. Hello, everybody. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge that we're gathered on the unceded Algonquin territory. Acknowledge the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs who organized this important press conference. My name is Willie Moore, the Manitoba AFN Regional Chief, and I am here representing the AFN Executive Committee. Comments on behalf of our National Chief, Cindy Woodhouse-Neepnak. I recognize AMC Grand Chief Betsy Kennedy, Grand Chief Garrison Setti from the Manitoba Kuwait Nahogi Maganak, and Dr. Cindy Blackstock, and also KTC Grand Chief Walter Steskut, and the Chiefs Committee on Child Welfare, Pimachikamak Chief David Monias. I want to start with stating that Jordan River Anderson and his family gifted us with Jordan's principle. Jordan's spirit and his legacy have positively improved the lives of tens of thousands of First Nation children from coast to coast to coast. While the government of Canada passed a motion 17 years ago confirming Jordan's principle, it has repeatedly failed to uphold its full meaning and intent. The Canadian Human Rights Tribunal found that Canada was discriminating against First Nations children in 2016 and subsequent orders since then. The Assembly of First Nations is prepared to work with all parties to follow the instructions of the tribunal, and the AFN has proposed interim solutions for implementations of Jordan's principle, as well to continue to pursue long-term reform on Jordan's principle. The Assembly of First Nations is committed to working with the parties to ensure that there are immediate interim solutions implemented to support children and families now, while we take the time that's needed to negotiate the long-term reforms. Our goal through negotiating a long-term reform agreement on Jordan's principle is to address all these issues and ensure that they never happen again in a way that's sustainable and upholds First Nations rights. The Assembly of First Nations remains ready to work alongside with the Caring Society, and in fact, we started this work together nearly 20 years ago with the original human rights complaint. The Caring Society has been invited back to the table to negotiate First Nations Child Family Service, and we look forward to their response. In the meantime, we are eager to negotiate alongside them on the urgent solutions needed for Jordan's principle. We will continue to follow our mandates from First Nations in Assembly. We have a resolution mandating our work to negotiate a draft agreement on Jordan's principle, and we will continue to pursue that mandate. As negotiations progress, chiefs will be fully informed of the process and will incorporate their feedback into our negotiations. Our focus is on securing a better future for our children as soon as possible under the direction and guidance of chiefs. Finally, no child should face delay, denial, or gaps in services to administrative red tape. A long-term reform agreement is an urgent priority to ensure all First Nations children receive the care and services they need and they deserve. Yukusani, English. Jamie? Jamie, put this.
Okay, so our first speaker will be AMC Acting Grand Chief Betsy Kennedy, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Betsy Kennedy, Acting Grand Chief of the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs. I want to thank you all for attending this important crisis that we're having on Jordan's Principle. And I want to thank our leadership for being here and standing behind us. And thank you all that we are bringing to address the Jordan's Principle shortfalls and the inequities that we have received, that we are going through. And especially want to thank our Cindy Blackstock. She is very much involved with our children right from so long ago, and appreciate your being here. We are here to address Canada's critical underfunding of Jordan's Principle initiative, which supports First Nations families and children. Jordan's Principle was developed in Manitoba in response to the fact of provincial and federal government's refusal to pay for services. It was created to ensure First Nations children and youth can access essential service promptly and rightfully, as it is their legal right. Many of our children, when they go to attend medical or any kind of things that we would like to have our children receive, they do not get that. And it is through challenges that we have to do in order for our children to receive and rightfully have these principles that Jordan had provided us. Despite Canada's failure to fund Jordan's Principle, many First Nations are trying to meet the needs for their families. They are not receiving funding to provide these services. They are currently running deficits. ISC region is not responding to their request, sending them to Ottawa. Ottawa staff are not answering their emails and calls. First Nations need ISC to fully resource and prioritize full and equitable funding and reimbursement for cost before year's end. I hear from leadership that they have provided these costs above what they are receiving right now, and they do provide for reimbursement, but they have not been reimbursed. Because the First Nations are not getting funding and reimbursed for the cost for Jordan's Principle, they are referring their citizens to other organizations that are also not getting fully funded or reimbursed. The federal government's failure to address growing Jordan's Principle backlog adds financial strain on First Nations leadership, forcing them into difficult position to provide essential services despite limited resources. First Nations in Manitoba are being told by regional staff that their Jordan's Principle initiative is under critical review, and there may be no further funding until fiscal year ends. This week, First Nations in Manitoba received emails stating that if the limited funding they receive is exhausted, they must submit additional requests directly to ISC Manitoba region for review, requests that previously went unanswered for weeks and months. The leadership have been sending their concerns by emails and by phones, and why do this again when they haven't even responded to the first ones? So it is critical that the ISC does follow up in our request for answers on why our funding has not been released. It also increases the likelihood of child welfare involvement in First Nations families, as many families in Jordan's Principle funding for basic needs like food, clothing, education, and medical care, which directly impacts the ability to maintain family stability and avoid child welfare intervention. The children our children have always been you know, they're always being looked after by governments in many ways. They are looked after under welfare. Even when you give birth to your own children, there's always somebody there, a nurse, to provide you, making sure that you have adequate equipment for your child. And if not, then that's the first thing they do, is try and find different ways of trying to take your child away from you. And that's still happening. This situation is not only a policy failure, but a violation of Canada's human rights tribunal binding orders. The Canadian government is non-compliant and in a breach of its legal obligations to First Nations children, as outlined in the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal. Canada must stop discriminating against First Nations children by denying funding to essential services. Finally, the crisis must be addressed immediately for the well-being of First Nations children and the integrity of Canada's commitments to reconciliation and human rights. Oksana.
Miigwech, Grand Chief. I'd like to call up MKO Grand Chief Garrison Sethi, please.
Tansi, Uju Hanin, Etlenite, How Mitakwapi. I'm honored to be here this afternoon to stand with our leadership, the chiefs that are behind me, and the Grand Chiefs that are here, because we're here as the voices of the children we represent in our First Nation. And as we stand here, because there is a crisis that is happening, the children that so desperately need services and care are being denied of those services simply because Canada is failing to meet its obligation to meet those needs. There are backlogs of cases and requests, and chiefs are forced to use their own funding to be able to meet these needs. And they were told to spend because they will be reimbursed, but now the situation is critical. That money is not coming, and our First Nations are very concerned because a lot of them accumulate a lot of expenses. And Canada is unable to uphold their obligation to these children. And this is something that we cannot simply ignore. Like my colleague said, it is a legal violation. The Canadian government is in breach of its legal obligations to our children. And there's something that has to be done. We cannot let this slide. We cannot simply accept it. We want to be able to meet the needs of these children, the most vulnerable in our society. For years and decades, our children were violated and harmed by the system that the government created, and they continue to harm our children. They continue to violate our children, but we will not stand for it. We will not accept it. Canada will fulfill its obligations to our children. We will not let this go. So Canada is forced in a position where you have to reconcile with us. We cannot be lied to anymore. We don't want empty promises anymore. We want Jordan's principle to continue to meet the needs of the children that so desperately need it. Come on, Canada. Canada immediately restore the funding and end the backlogs that are plaguing our First Nations. It is your duty to do so, and we demand that you replace these programs and the funding that's so desperately needed. Egosani, kinanas kamit na.
Miigwech, Grand Chief. I'd like to call up KTC Grand Chief Walter Westesakut to speak next. Miigwech.
Oops. Thank you. This is a long-standing issue for us and the 11 nations that are affiliated with Kuwaitan Tribal Council. Approximately 1 year ago, the Canadian government owed Kuwaitan Tribal Council $7 million because they hadn't reimbursed the amounts that had been expended for the Jordan's Principle program. By the time we did recover the costs, they were at $8 million. Right now, the 11 First Nations are owed millions of dollars. The representative in Manitoba told us to continue to spend, as you've heard here earlier. But reimbursements were not forthcoming and are not forthcoming. I'm in possession of a letter dated December 4 from Canada confirming that they have 25,000 claims before them that are of, what do they refer to them as, self-expressed serious claims. There is a current total backlog of 131,000 claims. That is across the country. I have met a couple of times with federal representatives here in Ottawa who have promised to come forward with the numbers that are related to our 11 nations. They're still not forthcoming. I had an opportunity to meet with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau at an event in Winnipeg not very long ago, at which time he said he would find my letters that he has not responded to. I'm still waiting for something from him. Canada is obviously not serious. They will disregard legal rulings, yet every time we advocate for our people, advocate for our territories, advocate for our environment, they throw the rule of law at us, criminalize us. Canada has a long, long history of genocidal legislation. And yes, they have been attacking our children for generations. I am a survivor of an Indian residential school, and I know what that attack is. I have felt it, I have been there. This is another attack on our children, and we can't stand for it. This time they are ignoring legal rulings so they can attack our children. One of the biggest passions of mine is to help a family. And that, in many cases, that means helping adults find treatment programs that can address their needs. Since last summer, claims have gone in to Canada to address the needs of treatment, detox and treatment, because we're combating an opioid crisis right now. Those claims have remained with Canada and come back declined. They will not support families get well. They will not support families get healthy. There is something terribly wrong with that picture. Justin Trudeau and his ministers can travel around the world and brag about the achievements of this Canadian government. It's shameful. Nobody wakes up and decides to be an addict. Nobody wakes up and decides to be an alcoholic. All of that was brought on by Canada's failures over a number of generations. This legislated genocide. It all sits with Canada. And this time Canada is attacking our children again through their inaction on Jordan's Principle. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Next up, we have Pima Chicamac First Nation Chief David Munias.
Thank you. I was sitting there praying that I didn't have to go after Cindy. And what am I going to say after she talks? She's a wonderful speaker and a very good spokesperson. You know, it's a shame that we have to stand here before you, you know, to come and raise this awareness again in terms of what's being done to our children. I remember going back to 1994, fighting for the children with special needs. And it took us 5 years to develop something called Children with Lifelong Complex Medical Needs. I worked hard on that. 5 years, 1999, August 19. And when we developed that, it was then shortly after when that project was closed that Jordan was born. And then we developed one for Norrie House, creation that could develop a community-based program. But he passed between that time. So he fell between those cracks from original pilot and then the community program. And then from then on, was born Jordan's Principle. There was a lot of work that was done to bring awareness and raise this awareness with the politicians and so forth. I'm glad that Cynthia took it on and brought it up to the national level and to make it known worldwide. As you guys know, Jordan's Principle is established to ensure that no First Nation child would face delays or denial of services due to jurisdictional disputes between the federal and provincial governments. But don't forget also, when the first dispute happened, it was between interdepartmental, from health and First Nations CFS. That's where the jurisdiction happened, and then it flowed to province. That's why they have a responsibility here as well. Because just because the tribunal does not have jurisdictional province, they have a moral and legal obligation as well to the people and the children that they, because we are Manitobans. You know, despite its noble intentions, we continue to witness heartbreaking delays, denials of critical services. These failures are not just administrative oversights. They are violations of children's fundamental rights, as stated by the speakers. The very children who need urgent healthcare, education, social support are left waiting right now. While governments argue over funding and responsibility and doing a review, trying to find blame as to where this is going, and they're going to blame it to us. They're going to point the finger to us, say that we are to blame for that. That's what they're going to do. Just watch. You know, I sit on recently got appointed as Manitoba representative for Children's Chiefs Commission on Child and Family Services. And for me, you know, I'll say, let's be clear that the funding and the Jordan's Principle is not a privilege or a favor. It is a right. It was designed to fill the gaps created by decades of systemic neglect and underfunding in First Nations communities. The governments of Canada and the province are supposed to act first to meet the needs of the children and resolve funding disputes later. Is that happening? No. Instead, there's delays. The principle is meant to guarantee that no child's life is placed on hold due to trusting and wrangling. Yet the reality remains that every delay represents an unmet need, a family's suffering, and a betrayal of Canada's obligation to Indigenous peoples. This ongoing failure calls for immediate accountability and action. We demand that both federal and provincial governments honor Jordan's principle in its entirety, with no exceptions or excuses. Processes must be streamlined to eliminate delays, and the funding must be adequate to address the real urgent needs of our children. We need transparent timelines, equitable services, and a system that puts the well-being of children above bureaucratic convenience. Our children cannot afford to wait any longer, and as leaders, parents, and communities, neither can we. As we seek solution, we must stand firm. We must stand firm that we will not sacrifice our inherent human rights for the sake of compromise or convenience, as was done in that draft final agreement. The services provided under Jordan's principle must be robust, comprehensive, and culturally appropriate. Any attempt to impose inadequate funding, watered down services, or flawed dispute resolution mechanisms undermines not only the principle itself, but the dignity and futures of our children. We cannot and still will not allow that to happen under our leadership. The spirit of Jordan's principle is rooted in equity, dignity, and justice for our children. It is a call to action for Canada to uphold its legal and moral obligations and responsibility to Indigenous peoples. Our children deserve the same equality of care and opportunities as afforded to any other child in this country. They deserve to grow up with hope, opportunity, and the assurance that their lives matter. We will not rest until this promise is fulfilled, and we call on all levels of government to join us in making this a reality. For me, I will dedicate to make sure that happens to the best of my ability. I will not compromise. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Next and finally, but not least, we have Dr. Cindy Blackstock from the First Nation Child and Family Caring Society. Cindy?
Thank you, Regional Chiefs, Chiefs, Grand Chiefs, and all of you. We heard the word backlog, but what does that mean? Well, for Mary in New Brunswick, a mother with a disability with 3 young boys who have got a disability, it meant that she, with all of her love, would just put her hands up the stairs so she could get to the 2nd level to care for them. She got hit by an automobile and she could no longer do that. She needed some help so she could continue that care for her 3 special needs kids. And she was in that backlog, and Canada's answer was, we're not picking up the phone. A courageous mother from Winnipeg flees a domestic violence situation, and she's in the parking lot with her children in the cold winter with the car running, and she needs some support to get to a place of safety with her family. And Canada is not picking up the phone. An elder caring for 2 young children in British Columbia who have just lost their mother and brother need to get to a memorial potlatch to honor them. And Canada is saying that's not urgent. You can wait. That's what the backlogs are. But why do they exist at all? Well, first of all, as you've heard from the chiefs, this is a legal order. Canada chose to create these backlogs. They kept it under wraps. People at the community were raising issues with it. There were solutions put forward to it, and Canada chose not to implement those solutions. Canada has behaved its way into a crisis, and now it is saying, because we're so overwhelmed, we can't possibly do anything but discriminate against First Nations children. Who else would accept that in this country? Canada is saying there's too much volume. No one saw that coming. But I'll tell you, all the leadership here saw it coming because they have children in their communities who weren't getting the help they legally needed and were entitled to because Canada was always trying to narrow Jordan's principle. It was in documents. It was in graphs. The Canadian government knew that was coming. We at the Caring Society, for our small part, put forward numerous solutions on how they could improve their systems so that they could manage that volume and make sure that children were met, and that people like Mary and that elder in British Columbia with those 2 bereaved children and that courageous mother fleeing domestic violence would have not been in that situation. And leadership, you know, I want to commend them because they're the ones implementing Jordan's principle. They don't have the money to do it. They don't have the legal obligation to do it, but they love their kids enough to do it. And that's what Canada doesn't do. They don't love the kids enough to meet their own laws to honor them. So Canada chose to be in this situation. And that's why the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, just last week, with the support of the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs and many of the leadership you see here, has found Canada to not be in compliance, to order Canada to provide First Nations with sufficient funding so that they can discharge their responsibilities under Jordan's principle, for Canada to pay their bills. Why are First Nations, some of the folks that are most underfunded in the country, expected to be kind of the payday loan for Canada? They have a Department of Finance. They're not saying they're so overwhelmed with the millions of people that put in their taxes, including me, that they can't possibly receive my tax return because they can't process it. They're not saying they're overwhelmed and backlogged with thousands of cases under a Canadian pension plan or under an unemployment insurance. The government does this stuff. It is choosing not to do it, and it's making excuses for itself. And that is one of the most dangerous patterns I've seen all this time. We've done this for the children because we see them and they're beautiful and they're sacred and they need the help they need. They are the ones with the legal rights. Canada owes them an obligation, and Canada is not the victim. Canada is the discriminator. I want to end with this about why Jordan's principle is so important. Just before graduation, I got a phone call at our office, and it was a young man, and he had just graduated from high school. He wanted to let us know that he had learning difficulties. So for lots of his lifetime, he thought he couldn't make it in school, that maybe he wasn't as smart as the other kids. And he was on a place where he was really feeling hopeless. But then, through Jordan's principle, they were able to help him and understand that he just learns in a different way. And not only did he succeed, he graduated in high school, and he shared with us that he was en route to university to continue to make a difference for his community. We've seen Jordan's principle save lives, save childhoods, save families. And that is the power of Jordan's spirit. Jordan's principle isn't broken. The government of Canada is broken, and it's choosing to be broke. It could choose differently. I want the government of Canada to follow its own law. I want the government of Canada to finally put meaning in the words of reconciliation. There's a reason why the late Honorable Murray Sinclair put child welfare and Jordan's principle as the top calls to action. And if Canada really wants to honor his memory, they need to do the work on the TRC calls to action that the survivors have gifted us. This is a legal obligation.
Thank you very much, Cindy. Okay, I guess we're going to start taking some questions from the media, if that's it, Regional Chief, for speakers. Yes, so we'll take questions. If you could tell us your outlet and who you're directing your question to. One question, one follow-up. I think that microphone is working there, isn't it? Okay. Do you want to check that out, Michael? Perfect.
Hi, so it's Karen from APTN. I just want to clarify, there was a figure thrown out, $8 million, $7 million of net. Is that just for Manitoba chiefs, or is that across the country?
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
Sure. There was a figure thrown out that was $7 or $8 million in debt, and I was wondering if that was just Manitoba chiefs or if that was across the country.
It was an amount owing to Keewatin Tribal Council.
Okay.
The initial amount was $7 million when I learned about it. Then by the time we recouped everything, it was at $8 million. Since then, though, our First Nations today are still owed millions of dollars. I can't tell you what that amount is. We're going to quantify that next week.
Okay, and I had a second question, because it sounds like you're really robbing Peter to pay Paul, right? So
Yes.
that money is coming out of other programs or other things you need in the community. Can someone give me a sense maybe of what is happening to the communities as a result of carrying that financial burden?
Some projects are at a standstill. Others have been able to use monies from different parts that are not impacted immediately, so they're still in a okay position, but there's a deep hole there right now.
And then I guess my follow-up question to that is there any fear that you could be put under third-party management? Because my understanding is you can't shuffle money around like that.
No, they've secured themselves.
So it's okay, you're living with the debt?
I'm not saying it's okay.
Well,
I'm
yeah.
saying Canada is robbing our people. Canada is robbing our First Nations. You heard the previous speaker say Canada is deliberately doing this. You heard me say Canada is attacking our children again. That's what's going on.
Yeah, pardon me, and when I said okay, I just simply meant that you're not under threat of going under third-party management because of this. Okay, thank you.
Keewatin Tribal Council has been administering our misery for 45 years, and we've become very adept at it. And I say that because one of the chiefs back in 1978 that was a founding member of Keewatin Tribal Council stated that we can do this for now, but at some point we have to do something different or we'll just end up administering our own misery. And that's come to fruition.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for your remarks. My name is Brett Forster. I'm a reporter with CBC Indigenous. My question is for Cindy Blackstock and Regional Chief Moore. It's about Resolution 38, which was passed yesterday. It directs the AFN executive to support the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society to lead any process to achieve non-discrimination for child and family services and Jordan's principle. For Dr. Blackstock, how do you interpret that? And then what does that look like to you going forward? And for the regional chief, is the AFN, or how open is the AFN to working with Dr. Blackstock's organization in that way?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Brett. It continues on, and it says in ways aligned with Resolution 60 and 61, it clearly puts the Children's Chiefs Commission that Chief Monias is on as kind of the key decision makers in the day-to-day operations of the negotiation, and the chiefs themselves as the final decision makers. So when we look at that word lead, we don't mean take away voices. In fact, we've been advocating to make the circle bigger and make sure everybody is heard. What we look at is that we will do our best to work with our regional experts on the ground, with the National Advisory Committee, other technical experts to support the work of the Children's Chiefs Commission and to make sure that this ends the discrimination and stops it from returning again. So it's in alignment with the Chiefs' direction, and the Chiefs have the final say.
Thanks for the question there, Brent. As stated in the opening statement, we will continue to follow the mandates from the First Nations Chiefs and Assembly, as that's where we get their direction from. We have a resolution mandating our work to negotiate the draft agreement on Jordan's Principle, and we will continue to pursue that mandate. Like Dr. Blackstock has said, as negotiations progress, Chiefs will be fully informed in the process and will incorporate their feedback into the negotiations.
Thank you. I have a follow-up question about Jordan's Principle. The minister has repeatedly said that as the government goes through its spending reductions, that they're not going to cut services that communities rely on directly. It seems you're saying something completely different. So I'm just wondering if someone from the Manitoba leadership can square that circle for me. Is it your view that the funding for Jordan's Principle is being cut? And what do you make of the minister's previous promise not to?
Well, again, it has been stated time and time again that the legal mandate, right? And they had the failure to comply with an agreement, breach of agreement. And when you're told, the Grand Chief at KTC had mentioned, the communication was made between the parties, spend, reimburse you, look after it. And Dr. Blackstock said, if we have the time, she made that example of saying, well, they have the time for the taxation, but they don't have the time for the JP files.
I guess what I'm asking is money actually being cut? Is money actually being taken away, or is the government saying that the funding is
Well, for
running
one
out?
example, we had a meeting with the Minister of Advocacy when she was in Winnipeg last Friday. When Chief Elwood's asked her from Musqueam Seapeak, he had to lay off the George Principal staff, close the office. Small community that has limited own source revenue to offset the cost, as the reporter from APTN asked. And when you have zero money in the bank account because the bridge financing did happen, and you can no longer have the office doors open. When you have no office doors open, you can't provide the services as promised from the HRT tribunal, right?
Okay, miigwech, thank you.
Hi, Alessia Pastafimi with the Canadian Press. My question is for Dr. Blackstock. In one of the resolutions yesterday, Chiefs voted for the AFN to, quote, withdraw and apologize for any and all public statements that suggested or implied the First Nations Child and Family Services agencies led the campaign to defeat the draft final settlement agreement. For my recollection of the October Assembly, Cindy Woodhouse had went up to the mic afterwards and said that she did recognize that campaign. My read is that that's in reference to you. Do you expect her to apologize? And what do you make of that call in the resolution?
Well, I don't need any personal apology. I think, but I do think that we need to really value people out there on the front lines working with First Nations children and their families. And that is really a key piece, is to really honor them, uplift them, support them, and also look at how we can change these models to reform to really meet children's needs over time. All of that can be held together and be done at one time.
I also have another question for you about what Minister Haidu was saying this morning. She again said that she was disappointed that this deal wasn't accepted by Chiefs, even though, like you said, they didn't support it. What do you make of her still saying that she's disappointed when the overwhelming majority of Chiefs didn't want the deal that was presented to them?
Well, I don't even know why that comment was relevant. I mean, the government has said that they respect rights holders. Well, the rights holders made a decision. And so what they now need to do is get busy and follow the direction of First Nations leadership, create a national agreement with regional variations so that we can meet the needs of those children. That's the piece. Like, we're not grieving over the previous process. We got too much work to do for the children right in front of us. And that's exactly what we intend to do. And a further comment just about Brett's earlier question is that the government of Canada had included a very low fixed cost for Jordan's Principle. And we flagged that for them as a party at the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, saying, where does this come from? Oh, they said, don't worry about it. We'll actually, we just had to put something in the books. Well, you know, what we're seeing is that coming to fruition. And we're starting to see First Nations programs being cut. We're seeing children in that backlog. A way of saving money is not picking up the phone when people have a legal right to a particular service. And that's what Canada is doing. And that is a contravention of the Canadian Human Rights Act. And frankly, it's a contravention of basic Canadian values. Everybody, doesn't matter what political party you belong to, when you see a kid in need, the real judgment of the merit of an adult is whether you're there to meet that need. Because that's our fundamental role. It doesn't matter if you're working in the gas lines, or if you're working in a hospital, or in the courts, or if you got so much money you don't have to work at all. Our fundamental role as adults is to look after those kids. And that's why politics doesn't really matter on this one. They need to discharge their legal obligation.
Okay, so I guess that's it. If that's it for the questions, I'm sure the chiefs will be available for some one-on-one questions after. Miigwech, everybody. Thank you.